The hum of the neon lights buzzed around him as Malik stepped into the cold, pristine gallery. It was a world he had always dreamed of entering, though not one he had ever expected to conquer. The walls gleamed with pristine white surfaces, showcasing the works of famous, established artists whose names were synonymous with wealth, fame, and prestige. To the untrained eye, this was merely a room of art. But to those who truly understood, it was a battlefield, where only the strongest survived, where reputations were made, and where the price tags weren't just for the canvas but for the very soul of the work. Malik was no stranger to art. His work was raw, visceral, deeply emotional. It told the story of humanity, its failures, its triumphs, its struggles, and its unyielding fight for survival. His pieces were futuristic, layered with symbolism that only those who had lived through the darkest of times could understand. Yet, here he was, an unknown artist, about to face the unforgiving world of high society, hoping to see his creations displayed on these very walls. As he walked deeper into the gallery, he felt a sense of both awe and discomfort. The space was filled with expensive, pristine works from artists whose names were etched in history. A faint scent of polished wood mixed with the ever-present scent of high-end wine. The floor beneath him was marble, reflecting his every step as he made his way to the main counter. He could feel the eyes of the attendants watching him, assessing him. He wasn't dressed in the same designer clothes as the usual patrons, but his attire was stylish enough to blend in. Still, it felt like the world he had walked into was alien to him. At the counter, a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 50s, who Malik assumed was the gallery owner, was on the phone. His face was one of quiet arrogance, lips curled in a slight smirk as he nodded and took notes, dismissing any thoughts of interruption. Malik waited for several minutes, but the man didn't look up. He stood there, waiting patiently, his portfolio of artwork tucked firmly under his arm. His breathing slowed, and his mind raced with thoughts of what he would say when the man finally acknowledged him. He knew that the moment was important. His future as an artist might very well depend on how this first interaction played out. Finally, the gallery owner hung up the phone and turned his attention to Malik, his eyes scanning him from head to toe, taking in his unremarkable appearance. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Can I help you?" The man's voice was flat, a tone that suggested disinterest, but also a quiet expectation that Malik was not worthy of his time. Malik's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his calm. "Yes, I have some works I'd like to show you. I believe they might be a good fit for your gallery." The owner chuckled softly, the sound dripping with condescension. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as if sizing up the artist before him. "You have some works to show me, eh? And what makes you think they're good enough for this gallery?" The owner's voice was dripping with skepticism, as if the very idea of a newcomer having anything worthy of display was laughable. Malik didn't flinch. He had anticipated this. "They're unique pieces. They represent a future that humanity is heading towards, one of strength and resilience, but also one of hope. They combine art with technology in a way that hasn't been seen before." The gallery owner raised his eyebrows, a hint of amusement dancing in his gaze. "A mix of art and technology? How quaint. And you're telling me that these pieces are valuable?" Malik opened his portfolio and carefully laid out a selection of his work on the counter. Each piece was vibrant, layered with complex details that fused organic forms with futuristic tech. There were vibrant depictions of humanity's resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, stories of war and triumph, all told through bold brushstrokes and intricate digital effects. The pieces spoke of the future, of humanity taking control of its destiny. The gallery owner's eyes flicked over the pieces quickly, barely giving them a second glance. His lip curled slightly, and he tapped his fingers on the counter, clearly disinterested. These are not even remotely the kind of thing that will sell here. Your work is far too pedestrian. It's too out there. This is a high-end gallery, not some underground exhibition." Malik stood still, trying not to let the sting of the words affect him. He had heard it all before, too bold, too unconventional, too dark. But he knew his work had value, even if the world didn't yet recognize it. Art doesn't need to be what's expected, Malik replied, his voice steady. It needs to provoke thought, to challenge the viewer. It's not about what's fashionable. It's about what's real. This is the future of art, where humanity takes control of its narrative. The gallery owner's expression hardened, his earlier amusement giving way to contempt. I don't think you understand how this works, son. This is a place of prestige, not some experiment. Maybe you should try a local cafe or one of those alternative galleries. People there will buy into whatever you're selling. Malik didn't move. He didn't respond with anger or frustration. Instead, he gave a small, knowing smile. The owner didn't understand. He never would. But what the man didn't know was that Malik's work was more than just paintings. It was part of a much bigger picture. It was a reflection of humanity's strength in the face of overwhelming odds, an artistic declaration that humanity was no longer at the mercy of anyone, not even the most elite art circles. As he turned to leave, the gallery owner muttered something under his breath, probably about how the young man would never make it in the art world. But Malik didn't hear it. He didn't need to. He had already made up his mind. This gallery, this world of elitism and shallow judgments, wasn't where he belonged. The future, Malik knew, was bigger than this small, confined space. And soon, the world would know it too. Malik's decision to leave the gallery that day wasn't an act of surrender, it was a declaration. He knew the world of high-end galleries and snobbish art critics wasn't ready for him, but that didn't matter. He wasn't in it for their validation. His vision transcended the confines of old-fashioned institutions. What he carried with him wasn't just paint on canvas, it was the future, a future that humanity, especially the disenfranchised, could claim as their own. Weeks passed, and the sting of rejection slowly faded into the background of his mind as Malik returned to his studio, locked away from the prying eyes of those who would mock him. His works began to take on a deeper, more intense life. There was an urgency to them now, each piece spoke louder than the last. Malik's art wasn't just about images, it was a challenge. It was a narrative that explored what it meant to be human in an ever-evolving, unforgiving universe. And the world was beginning to notice. It started with a single post on a small, independent art forum. A critic, one who had little reputation but a deep understanding of the true nature of art, had discovered Malik's work and written a glowing review. What caught the attention of others was the way he described Malik's pieces. They were more than just art, they were a powerful commentary on humanity's fight for survival and growth in a world that was increasingly driven by technology. They weren't just abstract or political, they were deeply human. The critic called it a perfect blend of emotion and tech-driven futurism. From there, the buzz grew. The art world, now struggling with new technology that allowed for digital manipulation of traditional forms, was already in the midst of a shift. Malik's work was the perfect symbol of this evolution, a fusion of organic humanity and the cold, hard edge of technological advancement. It wasn't just a metaphor. His art felt alive, pulsating with an energy that seemed to reach out and grab anyone who dared to look closely. By the time the media caught wind of the buzz, Malik was being invited to underground exhibitions and independent art shows that celebrated new wave artists who weren't afraid to push boundaries. His work was soon being featured in niche galleries around the world, places that didn't cater to the rich or the powerful but to the people, the artists and patrons who wanted to challenge the status quo. Malik's work was making waves because it was raw, it was relevant, and above all, it resonated with those who believed humanity could do better. It was at one of these underground shows that Malik's true breakthrough occurred. He had spent hours talking to fans, collectors, and other artists, all of whom praised his work. But it wasn't until a visit from a mysterious figure that things truly changed. The man, dressed in a sleek, all-black suit with a silver tie, seemed out of place in the low-key venue. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His cold, calculating eyes scanned Malik's paintings, taking in every detail with a level of intensity that made Malik uncomfortable. Interesting, the man said, his voice smooth, almost calculated. I've heard much about you. Malik, isn't it? Yes, Malik replied cautiously, sensing the man's authority. I'm Malik. What do you think of the work? The man didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stepped closer to one of the larger pieces, an intricate depiction of a human city in ruins, with the silhouettes of towering robots and cyborgs standing victorious over the ruins of war. This, the man said, his finger tracing the edges of the piece, is something different. It's powerful. This isn't just art, it's a vision. A statement about humanity's role in the universe. Malik raised an eyebrow. I wouldn't say it's just about humanity's role, he said, his voice growing more passionate. It's about the fight to survive, to rise above the chaos and redefine who we are in the face of overwhelming odds. The man nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Exactly. And I think that's why it's going to take off. The world needs this kind of vision. This kind of perspective. We're entering a new era, and humanity is going to have to decide whether it will survive or perish. And your art, it captures that struggle perfectly. Malik felt a surge of energy in his chest. This was what he had been waiting for. The man's words, though vague, echoed something deeper. Something powerful. His art was more than just decoration, it was a tool. It had the potential to change the way people thought, the way they saw themselves, the way they saw the future. I've been following your work for some time, the man continued, stepping back to observe Malik's other pieces. Your art is more than just aesthetics, it's a statement. It speaks to the future of humanity, to what we're capable of when we push beyond our limits. You're ahead of the curve. And I think you know that. Malik swallowed, unsure of where this conversation was heading. Who are you? He asked bluntly. The man's smile widened, though it was not the warm smile of a friendly patron. It was calculating, almost predatory. My name is Alexander Kor. I represent several intergalactic consortiums interested in acquiring works that capture the essence of humanity's potential. You see, humanity's journey is not just confined to Earth anymore. You're part of something much bigger than you think. Malik's pulse quickened. He had always known his work had potential, but this? This was something he hadn't imagined. The reality of his art's importance, of its relevance to not just Earth, but to the universe, was finally becoming clear. I'm offering you something very few artists will ever have the chance to experience, Kor continued. I want to help you take your art beyond this world. The pieces you've created, the messages you're sending, they're going to influence not just humanity, but civilizations beyond Earth. You could be part of an intergalactic movement, a revolution of thought. Malik blinked. Are you saying, my art could be shown on other planets? Kor chuckled, a rich, dark sound. Not just shown. It will be a symbol. Your work will be at the forefront of the narrative humanity tells across the stars. Imagine that, your vision of humanity's future on worlds far beyond this one. People will look to your art for inspiration. You could be the catalyst for the next stage of human evolution. The weight of Kor's words settled into Malik's chest. He had come to this moment with no expectations, but now he could see it. His work, his struggle, his message, was going to transcend borders, transcend worlds. His future wasn't just as an artist. It was as a pioneer. The offer from Alexander Kor wasn't just an opportunity, it was a turning point. Malik could feel the gravity of the decision pressing down on him as he left the small gallery that night, his mind racing. This was more than just a chance to have his work displayed in prestigious institutions or make a name for himself as an artist. What Kor had presented to him was the gateway to something far more profound, something that could change the course of humanity's future. As the days went by, Malik found himself at the crossroads of a decision that could alter the trajectory of his life. Kor's offer had been enticing, the chance to introduce his work to the stars, to influence civilizations across the galaxy, to be a part of the narrative of humanity's place in the universe. But it also meant entering into a world he hadn't yet fully understood, a world of intergalactic politics, power struggles, and high-stakes diplomacy. For the first time, Malik allowed himself to consider the gravity of what his art represented. It was more than just political commentary or cultural critique, it was a message. His work, the fusion of humanity and technology, the struggle for survival and ultimate victory, was a reflection of humanity's spirit. If the rest of the galaxy could see that, could understand the power of this message, it could ignite something revolutionary. But there were risks. Could he really trust Core and his mysterious consortiums? Was this a genuine opportunity, or was it just a way to exploit his art for someone else's agenda? Still, Malik knew one thing for certain: the world, and even the universe, was not ready for the art he was creating. They hadn't seen it yet, the way his pieces merged organic life with futuristic technology in a struggle for dominance. What he was creating spoke to the heart of humanity, but it also pushed the boundaries of what people thought was possible. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his art wasn't just about aesthetics, it was a declaration of what humanity was capable of when it truly embraced its potential. It was about the fight for survival, for control, for the triumph of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. His art wasn't just a reflection of humanity's current struggles, it was a vision of a future where humanity emerged victorious, stronger than ever before. It wasn't just art, it was the manifestation of an ideal. It was humanity, F***K, yeah. In the following weeks, Malik dedicated himself to refining his vision. He poured himself into his studio, pushing the limits of what was possible with technology and art. The pieces he created now took on a new depth. He was no longer just illustrating humanity's potential for survival and triumph, he was visualizing it. He could see a world where humans fought back against seemingly impossible odds, where they didn't just survive, they conquered. His paintings began to reflect entire civilizations rising from the ashes of war, technology and nature melding together to create something stronger, something unyielding. Word about Malik's work spread like wildfire. The underground art community was abuzz with excitement, and soon, even mainstream outlets took notice. It wasn't just the subject matter that made his pieces so captivating, it was the feeling they evoked. People could feel the power, the energy, the sheer force of will emanating from his canvases. His work was more than just art, it was a call to arms, a rallying cry to those who still believed humanity could rise above its limitations. Then came the breakthrough. Malik was invited to showcase his work at one of the most prestigious independent galleries in the world. The event was small by comparison to the grand institutions of art, but its influence was immense. Only the most forward-thinking collectors, critics, and artists attended. It was the kind of place where new movements were born. And Malik's work would be at the center of it all. When the night of the exhibition arrived, Malik stood in the gallery's grand hall, surrounded by his pieces. The space was filled with an air of anticipation. People had come from all corners of the globe, some to see the work of the young, unknown artist who had caused such a stir, others to see for themselves what all the hype was about. As Malik watched the guests filter in, he felt the weight of every eye that passed over his art. These were the decision-makers, the people who could take his work to the next level, or crush it before it ever had a chance to breathe. As he observed the reactions, a strange sense of calm washed over him. These people had come to see what he had created, not because of his name or his past, but because of the truth embedded in his work. It was a truth that resonated deeply with humanity's desire to survive, to overcome, and to thrive. Then, in the crowd, Malik spotted someone familiar. It was Core. The man in the sleek black suit was watching him from across the room, his calculating eyes locked onto Malik. He made his way toward him, his presence as imposing as ever. "You've done it," Core said with a slow smile, his voice laced with approval. "These pieces, they're unlike anything I've seen. You've captured something raw, something real. This will change everything." Malik didn't respond immediately. He had spent weeks thinking about the offer Core had made him, weeks spent questioning whether this was truly the right path for him. But now, standing in front of his art, surrounded by the people who could shape his future, he felt a deep sense of purpose. "I think this is just the beginning," Malik said, his voice steady. "I'm not just here to sell paintings. I'm here to change how people see humanity. We're not just survivors, we're conquerors. We have the power to shape the future. And my work is going to be at the heart of that." Kor's smile deepened, and he nodded. "You're not just an artist, Malik. You're a force. And the universe is going to know your name." The next few weeks saw Malik's work explode in popularity. The mainstream art world was left stunned. Major collectors, once skeptical, were now bidding for his pieces at astronomical prices. His art had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and the unstoppable force of humanity. Malik's vision had struck a chord not just with the art world, but with those who saw in it the potential for something greater, a future where humanity no longer bowed to the whims of the universe, but forged its own path. As his fame grew, so did the whispers of his next move. People were beginning to ask, what would he do next? Where would his art take him? And as the opportunities poured in, Malik realized one undeniable truth: the world wasn't ready for what he had to offer. But that didn't matter. Because now, he was in control. And just as the title of his most famous piece proclaimed, "You wanted war? Here's how humanity wins." As Malik's rise to prominence continued, the impact of his work on the art world became undeniable. His art was more than just a spectacle, it was a movement. People began to see the deeper meaning embedded in every brushstroke, every digital enhancement. His paintings told the story of humanity's journey, its battle against extinction, its fight for dominance, its resilience, and its ultimate triumph over adversity. What had started as a rebellion against rejection had now become a symbol of human strength and determination. But with fame came the inevitable attention from powerful individuals and institutions. Malik's work had caught the eye of those who controlled not just art galleries, but also the vast political and economic structures that dictated the future. The more successful he became, the more Malik realized that his art was no longer just an expression of creativity, it was a commodity. And as he found himself at the intersection of art and business, he began to question whether the success he had dreamed of was worth the price. It all came to a head during an exclusive gala in Paris, an event attended by the wealthiest collectors and most influential figures in the art world. Malik had been invited to showcase his latest work, a massive, multidimensional piece that depicted a cityscape in ruins, with towering humanoid machines rising above the destruction. The piece was a visual representation of humanity's ultimate victory, an allegory for overcoming the odds, standing tall after every setback. Malik had spent months perfecting this piece. Every detail was meticulously crafted, and the digital elements had been woven seamlessly into the traditional painting. It was a masterpiece, one that could take his career to unprecedented heights. But as he stood at the center of the gallery, watching the elite crowd fawn over his work, something inside him began to stir, a sense of discomfort, of unease. The gallery owner, a powerful figure named Jean-Luc Bouchard, approached him with a knowing smile. He was a man who had seen the art world from every angle and understood its power. Jean-Luc was the kind of person who could make or break an artist's career, and he had made it clear that he saw Malik as a valuable asset. "You've outdone yourself, Malik," Jean-Luc said, his voice dripping with approval. "This piece is going to be worth millions. The buyers are already lining up." Malik nodded, but the praise felt hollow. He wasn't sure if it was the hollow flattery or the sudden realization that his art had become a tool in the hands of the wealthy, but something inside him recoiled. He had always imagined that his work would bring about change, that it would inspire those who were struggling, who were fighting for a better future. But now it was being sold to the highest bidder, its true meaning lost on those who only saw dollar signs. As the night wore on, Malik watched as his piece was moved around, framed in the cold light of the high-end gallery. The patrons, all too eager to add another futuristic piece to their collections, walked past without ever truly understanding the story behind the art. It was a bitter pill to swallow. His work, which had once been an act of defiance, had now become a luxury item. The message he had poured into each brushstroke, the fight for human dignity, the resilience in the face of adversity, was slowly being diluted into something marketable, something for the wealthy to collect like any other object of value. But it was Jean-Luc's next words that brought the full realization crashing down on him. "We've been talking, and I think it's time you expand your horizons, Malik," Jean-Luc continued, his voice laced with an unsettling calmness. "You have the talent, but you need to think bigger. The universe is vast, and I think it's time we started thinking beyond Earth. There are buyers out there who would pay a premium to see your art on other planets. You could become part of something much larger." The suggestion wasn't subtle. Jean-Luc wasn't just talking about a few high-profile collectors, he was talking about taking Malik's art beyond Earth. He was talking about putting it in the hands of extraterrestrial civilizations, those who had the power to pay astronomical sums for the works of an up-and-coming artist who could shape the narrative of humanity's place in the cosmos. Malik felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just the thought of his art being sold to off-world buyers, it was the realization that his vision had already been co-opted, that his work was no longer about telling the truth, it was about profit. The question that haunted him now wasn't whether or not he should accept this opportunity, but whether he was willing to sacrifice his ideals for the chance to become the next great artist of the galaxy. Jean-Luc's smirk grew wider as he saw Malik's hesitation. "You're a visionary, Malik. You've created something that speaks to the human spirit. Don't you want to see it reach its full potential?" The words cut deeper than any criticism could. Malik's mind raced. This wasn't just about his art, it was about the future he had once envisioned, a future where humanity was no longer a slave to the whims of others, but a force to be reckoned with. A future where humanity had control over its destiny, where it wasn't bound by the chains of exploitation. But as Malik stood there in the midst of the richest, most powerful people in the art world, he realized something that was both frightening and liberating. The universe he had once fought for, the one where humanity could rise above its limitations, wasn't one that would simply come to him. It had to be claimed. And he had to decide if he was willing to fight for it. That night, after the gala ended and the elite filed out, Malik found himself alone in the gallery, standing before his masterpiece. The cityscape of ruins, the towering machines, it all seemed to shift before his eyes, as though it were a reflection of the battle he was facing in his own life. It wasn't just about selling a piece of art. It was about control over his vision, control over his future. He had always known that true change didn't come from submitting to the powers that be. It came from defying them. And as Malik stood there, alone in the gallery, staring at the reflection of the world he had created, he made a choice. He would not let his art become a commodity. He would not let it be sold to the highest bidder for the sake of profit. His vision for humanity's future was too important for that. He wasn't going to sell out, he was going to make the world, and the universe, see the truth. It was time for a reckoning. The decision Malik had made that night in the gallery was more than just a personal one, it was a declaration of war. His art was no longer just about self-expression or revolutionizing the art world. It was about something far greater. It was about the survival of a vision, one that would shape humanity's future. The world may have seen his work as a commodity, but Malik wasn't willing to let it be twisted into a symbol of luxury or elitism. His art was a battle cry, not a decoration for the walls of the rich and powerful. As Malik walked away from the gallery that night, he knew that his path had become fraught with peril. Rejecting the lucrative offer from Jean-Luc Bouchard and his consortium had put him at odds with some of the most influential figures in the universe. But it also had given him a sense of clarity he hadn't had before. The war he had been fighting wasn't just against critics or galleries, it was against a system that commodified humanity's spirit, reduced it to something that could be bought and sold. He knew what he had to do next. He had to reclaim control over the narrative. And that meant reaching beyond the confines of Earth. His art had to transcend the boundaries of galleries, planets, and even governments. But how? The answer came to him one sleepless night, as he sat in front of a canvas, staring at the glowing, digital images of his latest work. He would use the very thing that had tried to enslave his art, technology. Malik began working in secret. He spent days and nights poring over coding programs, learning how to harness the very systems that had threatened to control his work. What he created was a new form of art, a hybrid of digital and physical expression. It was a multisensory experience that combined his vision of humanity's resilience and technological supremacy. The art he was creating wasn't just on a canvas anymore. It would be projected, interactive, and alive. And it wouldn't be confined to galleries or museums, it would exist wherever the people were. Malik knew that this move would make his art even more powerful, more accessible, and more dangerous. If he succeeded, his work would no longer be something that could be hidden behind the walls of the elite. It would be a force, a wave that swept through the people, igniting a fire in their hearts, showing them what they were truly capable of. The digital landscape would become his battleground. The first exhibition of his new work took place in a rundown warehouse, far from the glittering halls of the art world. It was an unexpected venue, but Malik knew it would give him the freedom to experiment without the prying eyes of the powerful. The crowd that gathered wasn't composed of rich collectors. Instead, it was a diverse mix of activists, engineers, philosophers, and ordinary people who believed in change. The moment they stepped into the darkened space, they were immersed in a sensory experience unlike anything they had ever encountered. The projections surrounded them, showing massive war machines standing tall over the ruins of Earth. It was a dystopian world, but one in which humanity had fought back. The people felt the heat of the explosions, the shockwaves of destruction, and the pulse of triumph as they moved through the space. It wasn't just art, they were living it. Every step they took, every movement they made, was part of the story. They weren't just observing the narrative, they were becoming it. The effect was instantaneous. People were moved, overwhelmed, and inspired. What Malik had created wasn't just a work of art, it was an experience. And it had the power to shift the way people saw themselves. The audience wasn't just passive, they were participants in the vision of humanity's fight for survival and victory. They felt the urgency, the emotion, and the raw energy of the battle for the future. Malik watched as the crowd reacted. It was everything he had hoped for, and more. This wasn't just about creating beautiful images, it was about awakening something inside each person who witnessed it. He had created a revolution, one that wasn't just about war or machines, but about the spirit of humanity itself, the unyielding will to survive and to conquer. But Malik's actions didn't go unnoticed. In the wake of his underground exhibition, the art world began to react. The power players, the people who had once dismissed him, were now scrambling to understand what he had done. The major galleries, who had written him off as a mere trend, now saw the potential of his work. The technology he had used was groundbreaking. The idea of interactive art, one that could be experienced rather than merely viewed, was revolutionary. Malik had struck a chord with something primal, something deep within humanity. And the elite couldn't ignore it. Soon, Malik was being courted by the very people who had once dismissed him. He was offered extravagant sums of money for his art, and his exhibitions were being hailed as the future of art itself. But Malik was no longer interested in the riches or the prestige. He had seen the true power of his work, its ability to move people, to spark change, to challenge the way the world saw humanity's place in the cosmos. He didn't need the validation of the elites. He had the people. And that was all that mattered. But as the power of his work grew, so did the opposition. The consortiums, the same entities that had tried to buy him out, were now realizing that Malik's vision wasn't something they could control. He was no longer just an artist. He was a threat. His art had become a rallying cry for the oppressed, for the disenfranchised, for those who had been left behind by the systems of power. The first signs of resistance came in the form of subtle threats. Malik began receiving anonymous messages, warnings, veiled threats, and hints of the consequences of defying the powers that be. But Malik wasn't afraid. He had always known that true revolution came with a price. And he was willing to pay it. Then came the direct confrontation. One evening, Malik returned to his studio to find it ransacked. His work was destroyed. His digital files were corrupted, and his physical pieces were slashed and defaced. It was a warning, a brutal reminder that there were forces at work who would stop at nothing to maintain control. But Malik didn't back down. He didn't retreat. He was more determined than ever. The destruction of his art only fueled the fire. It proved to him what he had suspected all along: this wasn't just about creating art. This was about a war for the future. It was a war that couldn't be won with weapons alone. It was a war of ideas, of vision, of will. And Malik was ready to fight. The destruction of Malik's studio was the first direct strike against his vision. It was an act of war, one that sought to break him, to crush his spirit and silence the message his art carried. But the act had the opposite effect. It ignited a fire in him that burned hotter than ever before. As he stood amidst the wreckage of his work, Malik made a vow: he would not let this be the end. His art was a weapon, and he would fight back with it. Malik's decision to push forward wasn't a rash one. He knew the stakes were higher than ever. The elites and the powerful consortiums had now marked him as a target. They understood that his art wasn't just influencing the people, it was awakening them. He wasn't just an artist, he had become a symbol of resistance against a system that sought to control and manipulate humanity for profit. His first step was to rally those who had been inspired by his work. He reached out to the underground networks of activists, engineers, and rebels who had been quietly resisting the dominance of the powerful conglomerates. They were the ones who truly understood the message behind his art, the idea that humanity wasn't just a pawn in the cosmic game of the universe. Humanity was the player, and it was time for the human spirit to rise. Malik's underground movement quickly grew. The people who came to him weren't just artists or activists, they were regular citizens who had been disillusioned by the way the world worked. They were the ones who had been pushed aside, forgotten by the system. And they saw in Malik's vision a chance for something greater, a future where they had power, where they could reclaim control over their lives, their future, and their world. The movement took shape quickly. Malik's art was no longer confined to galleries or high-end exhibitions. It was now everywhere. Projected onto the sides of buildings in cities, displayed on digital billboards in public squares, and even embedded in the virtual reality spaces where the oppressed had once gone to escape the harsh realities of life. His art wasn't just seen, it was felt. It was experienced. It was part of the people's everyday lives. And with every piece of art that emerged into the public sphere, the resistance grew stronger. But the consortiums weren't idle. They understood the threat Malik's art posed, and they weren't going to let it spread unchecked. They began to escalate their efforts to suppress him. The media they controlled began to paint Malik as a dangerous radical, someone who was inciting violence and rebellion. They labeled his art as subversive, a threat to the peace and stability of the galaxy. They attempted to discredit him, to smear his name, but the people weren't buying it. The more the powers that be tried to silence Malik, the louder his voice became. The movement had spread far beyond the original circles Malik had reached out to. It was now a global, interplanetary phenomenon. Malik's work was everywhere, and with every new piece, the resistance grew stronger. In the heart of the movement, Malik stood as a beacon of hope. His art was no longer just a representation of humanity's potential, it was a call to arms. The message was clear: humanity was capable of more than just survival. It was capable of greatness. And they would fight for that greatness. But Malik knew that his art alone wasn't enough. He needed more than just symbolic resistance. He needed a plan. And the people around him, the engineers, the activists, the strategists, together, they began to create a strategy for reclaiming the future. It wasn't just about fighting the elites anymore. It was about confronting the very system that had allowed them to exist in the first place, the corrupt governments, the corporate oligarchies, and the alien forces who had turned humanity into a commodity. It was time to take the fight to them, to show them that humanity would no longer be subjugated. The first step in the plan was the creation of a counter-media network. The elites controlled the flow of information, using the media to shape public perception and suppress dissent. But Malik's movement wasn't about to sit idly by. They began hacking into the media systems, hijacking the broadcasts to spread their message. They used Malik's art as their calling card, projecting it onto screens, embedding it in the digital infrastructure, making it impossible for the elites to ignore. As the resistance gained momentum, Malik knew that he couldn't fight this battle alone. He needed allies, both within the human colonies and beyond. And that's when he was approached by a group that had been watching his rise from the shadows, the leaders of a growing alliance of human colonies spread across the stars. These were the people who had already begun to see the cracks in the system, who were tired of being subjugated by the corporations and the aliens who controlled the galaxy. They were the ones who had seen Malik's work and realized that it spoke to a universal truth. Humanity wasn't just a species to be manipulated, it was a force that could reshape the universe. The alliance was small at first, but it quickly gained traction. They were tired of the status quo, tired of being ruled by distant corporations and alien overlords. They wanted control of their own destinies. And they saw in Malik's vision the potential to not only break free from oppression, but to assert humanity's place as a dominant force in the galaxy. Malik's role in the alliance was clear. He was the symbol, the spark that had ignited the flame of rebellion. His art had inspired millions, and now, it would be the foundation upon which the resistance would build its strength. But the real work was just beginning. The next step in the plan was to take action, direct action. The resistance began to sabotage the infrastructure that had allowed the elites to maintain their control. They targeted the corporations' supply chains, their energy sources, and their communication networks. They launched covert operations against the alien forces that had been exploiting humanity, using Malik's art as their rallying cry. Every successful operation, every strike against the system, was a victory in the larger war. But the counterattacks were only the beginning. Malik knew that to truly change the system, he would have to confront the very powers that held the galaxy in their grip, the corporate elites, the government leaders, and the alien overlords who saw humanity as nothing more than a resource. The war had begun. And Malik was ready to lead the charge. The movement had grown beyond anything Malik had ever imagined. What had started as a fight for control over his art, a defense of his vision and the human spirit, had transformed into a full-scale revolution. The alliance of human colonies had become a formidable force. Armed with technology, fueled by Malik's vision, and driven by the relentless will of humanity, they were now in a position to challenge the dominant powers, the corporations, the corrupt governments, and the alien overlords who had long sought to control the destiny of humankind. Malik knew this was it. The final confrontation was approaching, and with it, the culmination of everything he had fought for. But as he stood at the helm of the resistance, overseeing their operations and strategic plans, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He had once been a struggling artist, mocked and underestimated. Now, he was leading an intergalactic movement that threatened to change the course of history. His art had become more than just a statement, it had become the weapon that rallied people to action. The plan was set. The resistance had infiltrated the most critical systems of the power structures that controlled the galaxy. They had targeted the corporation's financial hubs, cut off supply chains, and crippled communication networks. Now, they were ready for the final assault, the destruction of the command centers that dictated the fate of billions. Malik had worked with engineers and strategists to develop a sophisticated digital and physical assault plan, one that would take down the elites in one fell swoop. But Malik knew that no revolution could succeed without sacrifice. The final stand wouldn't be without its costs. As the resistance prepared for battle, he gathered his closest allies in a secluded war room, a hidden facility on one of the Outer Rim colonies. They were all there, activists, engineers, military strategists, and leaders from the colonies who had thrown their lot in with Malik's cause. "It's time," Malik said, looking around at the group. "This is what we've been preparing for. This is where it all comes down." He had no illusions. he knew that many would not make it out of this fight. The elites would not give up without a struggle, and their forces, backed by alien technology and vast resources, were formidable. But Malik was resolute. He wasn't fighting just for the future of humanity, he was fighting for something even more profound, the right of every individual to shape their own future, free from the chains of those who sought to control them. "We've fought with everything we have," Malik continued. "Our strength lies not just in our weapons or our technology, but in our will. We are humanity, and we are not going to let anyone decide our fate for us. This is our final stand, and we will win." The group nodded, their faces resolute. They had come this far, and they were ready for whatever would come next. The final assault began with a coordinated strike against the main hubs of the galactic elite. Malik's art, interwoven with digital and virtual experiences, was used as a distraction, a wave of resistance that flooded the communication networks and media channels controlled by the elites. Every time the elite broadcast a message, Malik's images would interrupt, blanketing the screens with the powerful images of humanity's resilience, war machines rising over burning cities, humankind standing tall in the face of cosmic threats. The resistance forces moved swiftly. A fleet of ships launched from various colonies, cutting through enemy lines with precision. Malik had spent countless hours working with his team of engineers to develop specialized digital weapons, disruptors that could disable the enemy's ships and systems. The enemy, accustomed to seeing humanity as weak and fractured, was caught off guard. As Malik's forces approached the heart of the corporate empire, he knew the most difficult battle lay ahead, a confrontation with the power brokers, the heads of the largest galactic conglomerates, and the alien overlords who had long manipulated human destiny. These were the people who had tried to crush Malik's spirit, who had sought to commodify his art. It would be a battle not just of weapons, but of ideologies. A battle for the soul of humanity. Malik's ship, the flagship of the resistance, entered the heart of the enemy's stronghold, a massive, fortress-like structure orbiting a desolate planet. The ship's hull glinted under the harsh lights of enemy defense systems as it prepared to breach the outer walls of the command center. Inside, Malik stood at the helm, his mind sharp and focused. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he also felt a surge of pride. "We will not be slaves," he muttered to himself. "We will be free." The final battle was unlike any Malik had ever imagined. It was chaos, blinding light, thundering explosions, and the deafening roar of combat. His forces had infiltrated the complex, disabling the external defenses and opening the way for the main strike team to engage with the enemy leaders. Malik moved quickly through the command center, a team of elite soldiers by his side. They had come for one thing, the heads of the corporations, the alien leaders who had controlled humanity's fate for far too long. As Malik and his team reached the central control room, they encountered the first wave of resistance, the corporate guards, augmented with alien technology. The battle was brutal, but Malik was relentless. His mind was sharp, every movement a calculated step toward his goal. The fight raged on, but there was no turning back now. Finally, Malik reached the core of the command center, where the leaders of the corporate consortium were waiting for him. They were seated in a grand chamber, the pinnacle of their power, surrounded by a glowing holographic display of the galaxy. They sneered at Malik as he entered. "You think you can change anything?" one of them mocked. "You're just one man. You're nothing." Malik stepped forward, his gaze steady. "I'm not alone. I represent humanity, every person who has been crushed under the weight of your greed. And you're about to find out just how wrong you are." With those words, Malik activated the final stage of the plan. His art, flooded the chamber's holographic screens. But this time, it wasn't just a representation of war and resilience. It was a message, a promise. A vision of a new future where humanity would no longer bow down to anyone, where it would stand tall among the stars, free and unbroken. The leaders of the corporations looked in shock as the system they had built for centuries began to crumble. The rebellion had succeeded. The final confrontation was over, and Malik stood victorious. The elites were toppled, the alien overlords defeated, and humanity was free to chart its own course. Malik's art had not only changed the course of history, it had become the symbol of humanity's will to survive and thrive, no longer a tool for the rich and powerful, but a beacon of hope for the future. Malik's journey had come full circle. From a mocked artist to the leader of a revolution, he had led humanity to its greatest victory. The war was over, and humanity had won. But as he looked out into the stars, Malik knew this was just the beginning. The future was theirs to shape, and they would never let anyone control it again.